You know when you can look at a logo and instantly recognize the team it represents? Well, that's because that logo is doing its job. Help set that team apart and give it an identity. While some schools have a timeless look and they dare not mess with a proven recipe, other schools have had to undergo some changes to find the look that fits them best. And that's what this video is all about. So join me as we look at uniform and logo rebrands that greatly benefited teams. We're going to start this video off with East Carolina. Now, the 1970s saw them implement their first logo on their helmet. Then the block ECU letters, followed by the script Pirates. Now, I prefer the head and the script, but none of those are as bad as the logo they used from the late 80s through the 2000s. Now, in the late 90s, they switched up the swoosh to make it appear more like a sword's blade, but this fat lettering reminds me of a bank or a little league team than it does a D1 athletics program. Creativity is elementary, and honestly, it could just as easily be any other school with the ECU initials. In 2009, they broke out the new and improved Skull and Crossbones logo for a game against Virginia Tech. Now this is branding. I like the intimidating look of the bones and the pirate hat, and I immediately think East Carolina when I see it. Things only improved from there, as college football was well into its let's have fun with our uniforms era. As you can see here, they went with a blackout look, and they would keep this fairly simple design pattern, especially on the pants, until they introduced the imitation stitching in 2017. This would evolve into also including other pirate-themed symbols, and these are my favorite pants for ECU and some of my favorite in all of football. It is still a clean look, not too busy, but not overly simple either. Also, with their updated uniforms and moving away from the block letters, this gave them the opportunity to go with some awesome throwbacks, including these throwbacks to their original logoed helmets, and also their recent retro script helmets. Although they've reverted back to a simple stripe or swoosh on the pants, it's still a better look than what they were rocking with in the 90s and 2000s. I also want to point out the rebranding on the field. In 2009, they introduced the Pirate State of Mind logo on midfield, and this logo features the new Skull and Crossbones image inside the outline of North Carolina. This replaced the previous pirate head that they were using, and they even used this new logo on helmets, which was a cool look. So ECU definitely had a successful rebrand here. Tulane is a school that actually benefited from going back to an older logo. In the 90s, Tulane began to use what I refer to as the surfing T. While this isn't as terrible as ECU's block lettering, it doesn't strike me as a permanent logo. This was fine for the 90s and early 2000s, but it doesn't hold up well to the changing logo landscape of the mid-2000s. So, when they decided in 2016 to return to their Angry Wave logo from the 60s and implement that onto their helmets, my jaw dropped. I absolutely love the Angry Wave logo. I think that it brings their blue back into play, and more than the Surfing T did, while keeping the green relevant. This allows them to pull out beautiful helmets in white, green, and this blue. I can understand if they want to have a throwback helmet in like 2030 to the Surfing T, but it won't be on my Uniwatch. Speaking of teams that went back to the future for their rebrand, another one of my all-time favorite logos comes from NC State. Now, I'm not a huge fan of NC State's NC logo. I mean, I can appreciate that they incorporate the NC inside the S and that makes it somewhat unique, but there are few logos in college sports that can touch the NC State Wolf. You instantly get flashbacks of Saturday morning cartoons with this wolf, but it also has some of that retro college football charm to it. The updated take on the 1960s logo that they use on their helmets and field now is just chef's kiss. It's so crisp and clean, but hey, I wouldn't be mad if they used the older profile version of the wolf more often instead of the head-on view we usually get. I am somewhat indifferent to their WCW-esque logo from the 80s and 90s, but then again, I don't absolutely hate this WCW logo either. Next we have Pitt, and to me it seems that Pitt can never stick with the definitive branding. They would flip-flop between mustard and gold, but at least they kept the script Pitt. Well, that was until 1997 when they rebranded with this thing. This monstrosity of a panther is just, like, how much did they pay for that? Surely they had other variations that would have been a tad bit better choice. That's a 2000s logo if I've ever seen one. 2005 they would begin to right the wrong, but they did so with the block Pitt in the vein of the script Pitt. This is a step in the right direction, but wasn't quite the solution. So, in 2014 they brought back the script on the gold helmets, and it was oh so close, but it was in 2016 when they finally got it right. They brought back the light blue script Pitt on the yellow helmets and have stuck with the throwback look ever since, and they should never touch it again. Pitt also sometimes experiments with these updated Panther head logo, but it looks too much like Georgia State, so they should just stay away from it. This may be a controversial entry, but for the longest time, Maryland stuck with these script Terps helmets. And these do look good, but Maryland needed a way to stand out. In 1997, they added a little element of their state flag. These helmets would only be around through the 2000 season before they reverted back to the script helmets and added small flag elements to their uniforms. But in 2011, they decided to go full send on the state flag and debuted these famous, or maybe infamous, uniforms in the 2011 season. They would go on to be their standard unis and would allow them to come out with different variations. And my only qualm is the Myrtle Beach spray paint font on the back of the helmets. These uniforms definitely brought the Terps' attention, and if you can't win consistently on the field, you need another way to stand out to fans and recruits, and these uniforms definitely made them stand out. They would whittle down the prominence of the flag, and eventually they went back to the script helmets and a simplified uniform, which look great, but there's something about the balls it takes to roll out those flag uniforms that make them special. It's almost like a phase that they were going through, and I wouldn't go back to them by any means, but they were one of the most unique uniforms in football at a time when Oregon had a different combination for every day of the week. Missouri. Now, Missouri is another great example of a team going from extremely generic to a one-of-a-kind logo that's synonymous with their brand. Mizzou spent a lot of time with a block M on their helmet. If you weren't a huge fan of sports that saw a big block M on a helmet, you could probably take 5 guesses and not even name Missouri. So, along with the new conference in 2012, they switched up the logo to the oval tiger, which I actually think is a good logo. Ovals obviously fit nicely on helmets and hats, and you get a tiger logo that's unique to this one school. If they want to break out the block M every once in a while, I can get behind it as long as they never go back to these hideous helmets. Next up, we have some quick blitz, so just going to quickly touch on these. We have Yukon going from the hideous husky eyes back to the classic C. And they also have these with just the husky head that aren't as good as the C, but not nearly as hideous as the husky eyes. Memphis, when they went from the tiger leaping over the M, which I think is a terrible logo, to the tiger stripes, it's just a much cleaner and better look. San Diego State. Now, the evolution of the Aztecs helmets from the name of the Aztecs to the Aztec A, and then my two favorites of the SD logo, and then the Mayan design that they've settled on recently, which looked really, really good. What else can you say about Wazoo, other than they went from this to one of the best logos in the entire country? Ole Miss. Now, while the Navy uniforms are still a good look, nothing will ever match the powder blue, and I'm glad they've made it the primaries. Starting in the early 2000s, North Texas thought they would go with a word marker on their helmets, which is a giant no-no in my book, and they surprisingly kept it in different variations for 13 years. Then they realized their wicked ways and switched it up by going with stylized wings, which is a really cool look, along with their full bird. And they interspersed some throwback eagle, which I'm also okay with because that's a very unique logo. In the late 90s, Temple debuted one of the ugliest logos I've ever seen on a football helmet. This logo would be alright if it was just the owl, which they would later switch to. But having the owl, your school name, and your mascot name all on the helmet is just way too much. They would eventually rebrand to the Temple T, and I think it's a much cleaner look. Texas State rolled with one of the ugliest logos in sports, and that goes for everyone who wears a variation of it. They displayed this logo throughout the 90s, and then from 97 to 02, they reverted back to using a retro SWT helmet, harkening back to their days at Southwest Texas State. That was a questionable decision, but they got it right in 2003 when they unveiled this sick Bobcat logo, and they've continued to perfect it with the garnet and gold. Man, that logo says badass football team, while the other one says, I got my logo from a set of stock images. Another team with a truly horrendous initial logo, this looks better suited for Georgia Savings Union than it does Georgia State University. I feel like if you're starting your program up within the last 10 to 15 years, you would know the importance of a catchy logo, but Georgia State came out about as bland as you can be. After switching to their aforementioned head logo full-time in 2015, they have won nearly half their games, and that is more impressive for them than it sounds. FAU actually started with a decent initials logo. They incorporated elements of the wings of an owl, and it was a font logo. But I don't care one bit for the full-bodied owl. I think it was actually a step back. While not necessarily a generic logo, it just doesn't really give me a reason to take it seriously. But in 2015, they started experimenting with what I refer to as their faux back logo. It looks like it's straight out of the 1960s, but in a fantastic way. Anytime you can incorporate the state outline, it's extra points for me, and the outline of Florida fits so well going down the helmet. They eventually dropped the full body owl on the opposite side of helmets with the faux back, and added the nostalgic feeling by just having the player's number on the other side of the helmet. Very simple, very clean. And finally, we have the team that is synonymous with uniform rebranding because they do it darn near every week. Now, this is probably the smartest thing that Oregon has ever done. They got away from the diamond plate shoulders and decided, hey, let's see how many different things we can do with our uniforms. This helped them stand out in the college football world and really sparked a trend of teams putting a focus on their threads and giving rise to communities such as UniWatch. Some people began watching Oregon games just to see what uniforms they would come out with, and that's the very definition of a successful rebrand.